here is, before you watch the video, consider subscribing. We are on our way to 1 million subscribers. But before we get there, we got to get to 1,000. And before we get there, we got to get to 400. Got the hiccups. I apologize. So please consider subscribing, comment, like, do whatever. All right. I've had this Mac Studio for about a week now, and I will say for sure that this thing is an absolute monster of a machine. This is the base model M1 Max, base model M1 Max Mac Studio. So it has 32 gigs of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD. Yeah, I mean, I'm almost at a loss for words in terms of how good it is. And with that being said, I mean, of course, I will have a few gripes, but for the time being, let me just talk about the main positive, one or two. So in addition to this machine, I also have a 16-inch MacBook Pro. And frequently when these YouTubers will talk about, well, I did this and I did this, I'm watching the videos and maybe you are as well. And you're thinking, I don't know what a lot of that means. All right, I'm not a professional. So you start throwing LUTs and color grading and this type of whatever, and that I don't really understand what it means. So when I'm uploading videos to YouTube, I use DaVinci Resolve to edit, and prior to actually rendering it, there are several presets, and one of the presets is YouTube 1080p. So that's what I use. In addition to that preset, I do apply one audio filter or whatever it's called. It's noise reduction, trying to, I think, focus more so on the speaker's voice and minimize any background noise. So that's it. I'm not good at all that other stuff. I haven't learned how to do it. Don't know if I ever will actually learn how to do all that stuff. So in terms of time, I exported the exact same video. The video was 39 minutes and 10 seconds in length on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, base model, M1 Pro, 32 gigs of RAM, 512 gig SSD. It took 12 minutes and 17 seconds. So not bad at all. And since I've been using that machine for the last however many months, I've grown accustomed to however long it takes, which is faster than anything else I've used before. Of course, until this Mac Studio. So for that same exact project on the Mac Studio, it took 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So almost 5 minutes faster in terms of how quickly it got finished. And that was just simply because the M1 Max has more cores than the M1 Pro. And I think that's really about it. I don't remember exactly how many each has, but in terms of overall clock speeds, I'm pretty sure they're relatively similar. I think there are some additional GPU cores as well. But it's clear to see, the Mac Studio or the M1 Max, we'll just say that, is going to perform better than the M1 Pro in certain situations. I have watched quite a few of the 9 to 5 Mac videos, and they've shown that depending on the workload, for some reason, certain programs perform better using this processor or this machine, while other times it works better over here, and sometimes it's not quite clear how to or why something is. Now, I will say, ever since Apple started producing their Apple Silicon, the machines, in terms of what they're capable of doing, almost mind-blowing. The one thing that isn't overrated, that plenty of people talked about or have talked about, is their fan noise or lack thereof. Of course, if you have the MacBook Air, there aren't any fans at all, so of course the machine is completely silent. But even for all the other machines, some have one fan, some have multiple fans, they are extremely quiet, to the point where with the MacBook Pro, I have to put my ear pretty much to the keyboard to hear anything. I was rendering, I think, like a 2-hour-long video, and the fans did spin up. I was using Handbrake, so for that I was like, okay, and they were kind of audible even from 5 or 6 feet away. With the Mac Studio, I really, had to put my ear to the machine to hear the fan spinning. I mean, if you put your hand on the back of the machine, you can feel the air blowing out. And I just so happen to have a few other computing devices in the area that are making noise. And almost all the time, the noise coming from those other devices was louder than the noise coming from the Mac Studio. The ceiling fan that is normally running is louder than that of the Mac Studio. I did a little bit of research after I purchased it, which I probably should have did before I purchased it. But I think some of these machines do have slight issues. Some are saying that it's coil whine, which then others are saying it's not coil whine, it's actually just the fans. So I do think the sound that I do hear isn't necessarily just the sound of the fan. I think there might be something going on with it that is maybe a reason why somebody sent it back to Apple, because this was a refurbished model. So I don't know, but I will still say it is by far probably, I guess, now the third quietest machine I've ever used. I mean, the first quietest being any of the M1 or M2 MacBook Airs, since they are completely silent. Then any of the MacBook Pros. I've had two M1 MacBook Pros, and then some other M1 devices. But this, by all means, is definitely up there in terms of one of the most quiet machines I've ever used. Now, let's talk about the actual hardware here. So you've seen this before. This is nothing new, nothing surprising here. You have your HDMI port on the back, headphone combination jack, power button, 2 USB-A ports, 10 gig Ethernet port, and then 4 Thunderbolt ports. And for the most part, I can imagine this is more I/O than almost anybody would ever really, really need. With the Mac Mini, all the I/O is on the back. And this is similar to what you'll see, I believe, on the M2 Pro Mac Mini and even older Mac Minis that did have 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports. But what's changed with the Mac Studio, which thank you, Apple, is they decided to put some I/O on the front. Now you have your SD card full size right here, and you also have 2 USB-C ports. Since this is the M1 Max and not the M1 Ultra, these 2 USB-C ports are USB 3 point something. For the Mac Studio that has the M1 Ultra in it, these 2 front ports are Thunderbolt ports. And this is where I started having my first issue with the machine. Now, if you're watching this, you'll probably say, well, you could have just looked online and gotten an answer to that question before you bought it, which is true. But even though these aren't Thunderbolt ports, they should still be full service ports. Meaning I should be able to plug something in and send and receive data. And I should also be able to output video from these ports. These Thunderbolt ports on the back, yes, can do all that. Data to and from, and then video out. These are just data. And you might say, well, Thunderbolt ports are special, so they're different, blah, 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 blah. And on the surface, it's okay to assume that. But you don't have to have Thunderbolt in order to be a full service port. As an example, here is a Lenovo ThinkPad T14 Gen 3. And it has a Ryzen 5 in it, which for the most part, there are, I think now, some subtle situations where it might not hold true completely. But usually when you have an AMD processor, I don't want to say 100%, because like I said, I think there are a few exceptions. But when you have an AMD processor inside a machine, you're not going to have Thunderbolt. So you're stuck with either USB 3 point something or with some of the newer machines, USB 4. And with these 2 USB-C ports that are not Thunderbolt ports, I can send and receive data, and I can also output video to my monitor or to my television. So here is a perfect example of them not needing to give us the full power that the physical port is capable of, but making it so that it's an actual universal USB-C port. And it's not that I didn't have enough USB-C ports. It's more so of the fact that the way that I have my desk set up upstairs, I'm using a dock, and it's a USB-C dock. So with laptops, I'm always plugging and unplugging that USB-C cable. Allows me to have all my peripherals connected, allows the monitor that's connected to the dock to receive the video signal, and I'm good to go. It's always just one cable that's connected to my laptop. But with this machine, what I have to do now is I have to take that cable out of the laptop, which is fine. It's as expected, but I have to plug it into one of the rear ports. And that's not the most convenient thing to always have to be doing, to always have to stand over the machine, unplug, do my thing. And when I'm trying to replug, stand over the machine, plug one in. In my opinion, giving all 6 ports Thunderbolt would have been great. Yeah, obviously I think that would have been the best scenario for everybody, even though it's not the M1 Ultra. But you don't even have to put Thunderbolt on the front at all. You could just make it so that these things are capable of outputting video. Now, what would the resolution be? What would the refresh rate be? I don't know. I mean, but like I said, you don't have to have Thunderbolt to make it so that these ports are capable of outputting video. If I were able to use these 2 front ports to output video, I'd have the Mac Studio sitting in front of me. And then I'd be able to just take my cable that's coming from the dock, plug it into the front, unplug it, plug it to the laptop, and it would be so much simpler. So that's my first real gripe. Also, I wanted to include, and I wish I still had it with me, and I know I've recorded a video showing a friend, so maybe I still have that video somewhere, but when it comes to Apple, they frequently will create these fake segmentations. So as I'm complaining about the USB-C ports that are on this machine that don't output video because they aren't Thunderbolt ports, even though Thunderbolt is not a requirement to output video over USB-C, I had a Mac Mini, not Mac Mini, I had an iPad Mini, the latest gen, I don't know, 5, 6, whatever it is, but it has a USB-C port on it, and I'm able to connect that to a television and it outputs video. The USB-C port on that Mac Mini is not a Thunderbolt port. So that just goes to show that, one, it does need to be a pro-level device to have a video out port, and 2, that port doesn't need to be Thunderbolt in order to output video. So that's just the segmentation. And again, you might be like, oh, well, you have enough ports on the back. You're right, I do have more than enough ports on the back, but I want to use the ports that are on the front. So these don't need to be Thunderbolt ports in order for them to output video. Apple has chosen to handicap these ports just because. So again, I am okay with them not being Thunderbolt, but I need them to be able to output video. And I don't like the fact that I need to upgrade to the more expensive model just to get Thunderbolt, which I don't need, but I need Thunderbolt in this situation in order to output video, which doesn't make any sense. Because with the Mac Mini, I gotten accustomed to having to always reach to the rear side of the machine to unplug stuff when I need to do things. And because of the dock now, I don't have to switch the mouse and keyboard and hypothetically an HDMI cable between different devices. I just have one cable that's capable of transferring all that information. But because of the way that this machine is constructed, unfortunately, I still have to reach the rear side of the machine. Is it the end of the world? No, but I am swapping between machines frequently enough that it is a huge inconvenience. I did think about getting a KVM, and I'd have to think, okay, for the KVM, technically, you'd probably have, two USB-A ports and some type of video out. You'd still be able to have 2 USB-C cables coming from the KVM, one going into the Mac Studio and one free for a laptop. I was thinking that, I still want to have some type of hardwired internet connection. So how exactly would I go about doing that? Would it be possible to run the dock into the KVM? I think it would be, but I don't know if I want to do that. So I clearly a workaround, but it's like, I need to buy the KVM because I don't own one of those. And the one that I have my eye on is about $180, which is cheaper than, the alternative, which we'll get to that towards the end of the video. But it's just one of the things that it didn't need to be done the way that Apple did it, which we know they did their own thing. And I get this is a machine for professionals, but I will say that Thunderbolt does not mean or is not only used on professional devices. Case in point, if we're just talking about Apple's product line, here is the M2 MacBook Air, and even if I still have my M1 MacBook Air, so not the pro level device, the USB-C ports on these devices are Thunderbolt. And I think what they've done is they've made it appear as if, yes, you only have 2 ports on these laptops. So in order for you to still get all of the, I guess, functionality out of the laptop without having to need all of the legacy ports we used to have, you need Thunderbolt, which, as I just pointed out with this ThinkPad T14, that they don't have to be Thunderbolt in order for you to have full service ports. So I think what Apple is doing is saying, okay, well, even though this is an Air, we've put Thunderbolt on these machines because you only have 2 ports. So therefore, you need the most functionality out of these ports, even though this is not a pro level device. So when you come over to the Mac Studio, it's okay, well, your main I/O is on the back, and that's where all the seriousness happens. But the front of your machine, you don't get all of the bells and whistles unless you decide to pay the additional $2,000 to upgrade to the M1 Ultra. So that's my first gripe. Okay, and I think I've talked enough about USB-C ports, but the point is there. And in fact, the last thing I will say though, because I thought about it right before I started recording, is that the other machine where if you spend more money, you then get Thunderbolt ports is the iMac, the 24-inch M1 iMac. That thing is nowhere near a professional level device. Do you need Thunderbolt on that thing? To my knowledge, no. And I don't know can you connect that iMac to a monitor? Like, will that Thunderbolt port on the back of that iMac send video out? I honestly don't know. Because if it doesn't, or if the iMac is not capable of doing it, then there's just another reason that Thunderbolt isn't required to do something, or Thunderbolt doesn't guarantee something is going to happen. So yeah, you don't need, it's what Apple does. I'll just leave it at that. And we all know that, so I should not be complaining. But I did attempt to connect these front ports to my dock. Didn't get anything on my monitor. Then I connected a USB-C to HDMI cable directly to my television. Didn't get anything on the monitor. The moment I switched both of those cables to any of these rear ports, everything worked as intended. So I think that's my first gripe. Or second gripe, really. And the last thing that I want to talk about, mainly because it isn't going to affect everybody, but it's something that I started doing a while ago. And I brought this machine down here because this is the Dell Precision 3470. And I've talked about this before, that in terms of it being a mobile workstation, this thing is a workhorse. I mean, I bought it a little over a year ago now. And yeah, you do have your 2 Thunderbolt ports over here. And then you have a bunch of I/O over here. But what I was using it for is virtualization. So there is a terabyte NVMe SSD in here, as well as an i7 12th gen processor and 64 gigs of RAM. But the issue with this machine is the fan noise is insane. And I get it's a laptop, so in terms of being able to effectively cool the processor, you can only do so much. I will say that they probably should have included 2 fans on this thing instead of just 1. The 5470, so its older brother or bigger brother does have 2 fans, but that one still gets a little loud sometimes as well. But when I was going through the processes of running however many virtual machines at one time, the fan on this thing was just nonstop, on, just kicking up noise, and it gets pretty annoying pretty fast. So instead of using this machine, I said I wanted something that's going to be quiet. Because everybody talked about how quiet these things are, I wanted to attempt to virtualize operating systems on this Mac Studio. Fortunately, I was able to do so. It's a little different compared to if you have a Windows host, but I was able to use VMware Fusion. I tried Parallels. It didn't do exactly what I wanted it to do, so I didn't spend as much time with it. But with VMware Fusion, it really feels like I'm able to isolate the machines, whereas with Parallels, it's running Windows and Mac OS in parallel. And I'm just like, that's not what I want. So fortunately, I was able to get, I think, 4 virtual machines running and with the fan noise just as quiet as it was as if I was sitting here doing nothing with the machine. So that was great. What is my consensus? Well, when running those VMs, and that's probably how I primarily use this machine, virtualization, some video editing, there are, I guess, several things to really consider. First, processor utilization. Running 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 VMs, is the M1 Max capable of doing that? From what I saw through Activity Monitor, yes. The machine wasn't sweating at all. In terms of the amount of RAM required to run that many VMs, is 32 gigs enough? Also, according to Activity Monitor, yes, 32 is more than enough. In terms of the amount of storage required to create that many VMs, is 512 gigs enough? From looking at the internal storage used, yes. If I'm not doing a bunch of other stuff, then yeah, 512 gigs is enough. All of those things said, comparing it to this, yes, I did need 64 gigs is really what I wanted. I think 32 was okay for maybe a similar amount, but 64 definitely made me more comfortable. The i7 processor definitely was not struggling at all, but you could see that sometimes, it was a little hiccupy. So yeah, this machine is quite capable, but it seems like the Mac Studio is more capable and does it way more quiet. I understand, yes, it's a desktop, so it's better, it's easier to cool, but my MacBook Pro was also performing really, really well, which was a laptop. So based off of everything that I said just a few moments ago, it would sound like I'm keeping the machine. Unfortunately, I'm probably not. Am I just going to flat out be done with the Mac Studio? I don't think so. I hate to admit it. And it's definitely one of those things where it's like Apple knows what they're doing. And I think it all boils down to these front 2 ports. I want to be able to output video over these ports. And I think I might upgrade to the M1 Ultra. I don't want to, but I might have to for what I want to do. I could keep this, and instead of spending an additional, maybe $1,000, I think is buying them refurbished would get me. But I could just buy a $200 KVM and make things work that way. And it's on the table, so I might do that. But for that additional money, even though I've shown that I don't need it, the machine has shown me that I don't need it. For that additional money, yes, I get those 2 Thunderbolt ports on the front, but I also get at least twice the RAM and a processor with additional CPU and GPU cores. Although, a processor with additional CPU and GPU cores, I get twice the storage. So it's not like I'm just paying for those additional ports. Got the hiccups. So I'm going to wrap this up. So if you're a professional, if you just want a Mac desktop, buying this through Apple's refurbished store, it was $1,300. That's refurbished and a military discount on top of that. So for $1,300, I think it's definitely worth it. If you need to be portable, then yeah, I would definitely recommend getting a MacBook Pro. But for somebody who wants to be stationary, yeah, the M1 Max Mac Studio is more than enough for 99.99% of people. So definitely consider it.